All right, we are on chapter 5. I like this one. And I wanted to talk to everybody before we kind of get going on this chapter. These are well-known parables. The parable of the mustard seed and the parable, don't let your lamp, don't hide your lamp under a bushel. No, we all know those songs and those parables. So try to think about before you read the chapter. What did you take from these parables? What's your kind of overall impression in your life about these particular parables? Before we get started.
I think it's pretty straightforward.
All right, go ahead.
You sow bad seed, you're going to reap bad rewards. It's just a metaphor for the way you live your life. If you cast out bad seed, which is wickedness, is going the way, and then you're going to wind up with weeds.
Don't line up with weeds. I like that.
If you cast good seed and help others and do what you're supposed to do,
okay,
then the good seed represents heaven. That's where you'll be.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Anybody else have an interpretation?
I guess my thinking was kind of in line with what I think the authors were saying, that, the gospel is going to be shared wherever it's going to be shared, and sometimes that's going to bear fruit in the lives of the individuals. Sometimes, while they say, Satan comes in and takes away the good seed or whatever, or there's just other things that are drawing attention. And that seems practical to me, because that sort of is the reality of what I've seen in my lifetime. Some people come into the church and they're all hot to be a part of it and excited, and then just kind of fizzles out. And then there's people like us that still showing up every Sunday. Hopefully we're the good seed, right?
Yeah, it does make a difference where you're sowing your seed and the action of the people.
Well, and for the lamp, I always just thought you were supposed to shine to the world.
Yeah, that's a nice image that we have. Yeah, that's along the lines that I was thinking too. Our authors talk about the nature of parables, and they actually point out that they are not earthly stories with heaven. They believe that Jesus was more concrete than that in his teaching. What he is saying to these people, and this is kind of a theme throughout our book, as you guys have noticed, but it's kind of the us versus them, the rich versus the poor. Jesus was very clear that the sovereignty of God is going to help them, so it's against that empire kind of pushing back all the time, and so he's using images that the illiterate peasants could understand, so because I'm getting ahead of myself, but there's one part where the disciples say, why are you talking like this, and he says, I need to talk like this for the people, and that really is kind of what we're talking about, If in order to sow the seed, you actually have to talk so people can hear it, So they're recognizable scenarios, and then they have this surprise twist ending for them. So he's challenging the assumptions that all the listeners, and that's all these people, the peasants, they already have a way of life, and he's trying to challenge that. All right. Somebody, that's awfully small. Looks good on my screen. Everybody have their Bible with them?
Yeah.
All right. Mark 4, verses 1 through 9. That's 24. I thought it would be bigger on my screen.
Got it here. It's a new international version.
Okay. Nadine going to read 1 through 9.
1 through 9.
Yeah.
Parable of the sower. Again, Jesus began to teach by the lake. The crowd that gathered around him was so large that he got into a boat and sat in it.
out on the lake, while all the people were along the shore at the water's edge. He taught them many things by parable, and in his teaching said, "Listen, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering a seed, some fell along the path. The birds came and ate it up. Some fell on the rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came out, the plants were scorched and they withered because there was no root. Others seeds fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plant, so that they did not bear grain. Still others fell on good soil. It came up, grew, and produced a crop, multiplying 30, 60, or even 100 times." Then Jesus said, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear."
Have you have ears? So listen is what he's trying to tell people. And then there's four. We kind of talked about this generally. Four kind of bad things that can happen with your seed. It can land. It can scatter and fall on the path where the birds can come and eat it. It can fall on rocky places that don't have much soil. The sun can scorch it and wither it because there's no root, and then it can grow among thorns that choke it. So these are the metaphors of this this scripture, and our authors take those metaphors and run with it. So here we go. So what does it mean? Okay, this is actually a description of dry soil farming in Palestine at the time. And so these peasants know that this is what they do all day long. They plant the seeds and they wait for them to sow. And they know that 75%, I thought this was an interesting point that they make, 75% of it is not going to yield because of the soil that's in Palestine. When you think about even Palestine now, it's such the climate, and there's so many factors on growing good plants that these people knew that they weren't going to get that much. So the status quo during that time period was the peasants, if only 25% of their crops yielded anything good, they were forced to ask for the loans from the landowners. And so that was their way of life, to go into more debt and more debt and more debt. It's that poverty cycle. And I just happened to teach chapter 3, the Jubilee. Remember that chapter? That was the reason they put this legislation in place, was to mitigate those problems. Oh, are you okay, somebody? Huh?
Yeah.
Can you mute him? Sorry about that. Okay, so the legislation was sought to mitigate this problem. And we talked about in chapter 3, and we continue to talk, that it's always it's unfortunately rich versus poor. We see it in our own country. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and there's this imbalance. And so Jesus, in these parables, just like in many lessons, he's trying to teach that the sovereignty of God is about changing that balance, and trusting God. So he recognizes where they're at.
I remember reading that this system was sort of the equivalent of our system of stock markets and investments today. And if you have a lot of money, it's easy to make more money because you can put your money into investments and grow very quickly. And this is how the wealthy in Palestine, their income was getting the peasants to become in debt to them, so they'd accumulate more land, accumulate rent from the peasants who farm on their land.
Right.
So this was a very quick way to make money.
Land.
I'm sure Jesus would have seen it's not the right thing to do.
Well, and it reminds me of the sharecroppers in the South, and also the Dust Bowls in Oklahoma,
Oh yeah,
where they
patterns.
They didn't do it.
Yeah, the patterns are very
all
clear.
Of the migrant workers in California that had to they sort of got a paycheck. It was kind of a chit or something.
Yeah, to
They
go
could
to
take
the
the company
and
to the
then they had to go-
landowner's store.
And then they had to go buy at the landowner's store.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That perpetuates that cycle of poverty. That's what, and here we are and still talking about it now. And Jesus was recognizing it back then.
Well, when I just finished the book Nickel and Dimed, where this journalist or essay writer lived for several months getting low-paid jobs and finding that she couldn't make them, so she took 2 jobs.
Well, COVID kind of did something interesting to our country. I don't know how many of you have gone to restaurants and fast food places these days. I've actually gone where they say, "I'm sorry, we're closed. We don't have anybody to work." And I really think COVID taught people that those small jobs that they had to do 2 or 3,
Yeah,
that's not a good way of making a living.
yeah.
So after COVID, they didn't go back. They
Yeah.
found something online or
Nadine and I went to lunch at the only restaurant that's still open without West Lenexa. And I swear it looked like most of them were about 13 years old. They had a bunch of kids working there.
they're really struggling. And it's interesting to me that, the big corporations, you got McDonald's, Wendy's, and those places, maybe they have to rethink their structure. I don't think they have yet, but, that's kind of, to me, a little metaphor of what Jesus is talking about, too. So he says that the best bumper crops were 6-fold during that time. So this story of him promising 30, 60, or 100, that was just like blow your mind. That's not possible kind of a thing. But he is trying to make a point that if you agree to God's sovereignty, if you agree to this redistribution of abundance, then that is the way to actually shatter that poverty cycle. And so he's trying to get them to hear it. And he's, different times in the Bible, Jesus is trying to get the rich to hear it and the poor to hear it. And he's actually trying to give these people hope. I think that's what this chapter is actually called, sowing hope. All right, I'll read this one because it's too small and it's short. Mark 4:10-12, if anybody's following along. When he was alone, the 12 and the others around him asked him about the parables. He told them, "The secret of the kingdom of God has been given to you. But to those on the outside, everything is said in parables, so that they may be ever seeing but never perceiving, and ever hearing but never understanding. Otherwise, they might turn and be forgiven." I think that's interesting. We've actually had different interpretations of that over the years, too. It's like, it almost feels like he's tricking people. But the way our authors say it is that he's anticipating the incredulity. I don't say that word correctly. Incredulity. There you go. Thank you. I read it more than I say it. So he recognizes that these people are going to be like, what? What are you talking about? And so they say the Jubilee is a mystery, not a secret. It's a mystery because it's the opposite of what they expect in their normal lives. And then he challenges his apostles. And he goes back to that, I went back and actually read the scripture. If you guys want to, it's Isaiah 6. And the whole chapter is wonderful. But verse 8, and Nadine knows this, I cry every time I say it. It's our wonderful song that says, "Here I am, Lord, send me." Mm-hmm. He says, "Whom shall I send?" And the part that always gets to me is this part about, he stirs hearts of stone. That's what he does. So Jesus is you see this all over the place, is that Jesus takes the Old Testament prophet's words and he expounds on them. I think that's what Amy Jo Levine said. Kind of explains them more and makes them part of their world. So it's him saying to his disciples, this is your challenge too, that you need to be telling these people so that they can hear it. Is that how we look at that scripture now, or I don't think he's really tricking people.
I don't, to me, there's kind of a dichotomy here. He talks, first about sowing the seed and almost in a way that suggests that we should spend our time sowing where it's most likely to be fruitful and not in the places where it's unfruitful. It says, don't hide your light, but let it shine and be out there. And then, where's this comes in? To you has been given the secret of the kingdom of God. Why is it a secret?
Right.
And
our authors don't like the word secret. They say the word should be mystery.
Yeah. Well, that maybe that fits better.
Yeah.
I mean, I can understand where Gnosticism came from, when he talks like that, because the Gnostics believed that they had some kind of a deeper understanding of theology and the gospel than everybody else.
Right.
Until you came to that understanding, you couldn't be in their group.
Right.
Very exclusive.
It was about being mysterious, and that, I think of monks kind of the same way sometimes, a lot of monks, not all of them, I mean, they have different schools of monks, but a lot of them, they just go to a place to study together, and so it's very inward looking.
Yeah, but I don't know, sometimes there's a mix of two different things that I don't understand in the New Testament. Let your light shine, but don't tell people about it. Don't let it out.
And I think what our authors are saying is that he's not saying that. He's actually saying, it's easy for you as my disciples, or it's easier for people to hear me who have the skill to hear me. But, he's talking to these, illiterate peasants that they need him to say things in their language, in something that they'll understand, So I don't know if it's condescending.
That's the problem. So they don't.
Right.
I mean, a lot of the disciples don't get it.
Well, that's what I was thinking too. I think that he should have said that for all the people, including his own disciples. It's like, I'm talking like this so that you'll actually get it. That's what he's trying to say, I think. All right. Penny's got her book open. How about Mark 4:13-23?
And Jesus said to them, don't you understand this parable? How then will you understand any parable? The farmer sows the word. Some people are like seed along the path where the word is sown as soon as they hear it. Satan comes and takes away the word that was sown to them. Others, like seed sown on rocky places, hear the word and at once receive it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. Still others, like seed sown among thorns, hear the word, that the worries of this life, then the deceitfulness of wealth, and the desires for other things come in and choke the word, making it unfruitful. Others, like seed sown on good soil, hear the word, accept it, and produce a crop 30, 60, or even 100 times what was sown. He said to them, do you bring in a lamp to put it under a bowl or a bed? Instead, don't you put it in its stand? For whatever is hidden is meant to be disclosed, and whatever is concealed is meant to be brought out into the open. If anyone has ears to hear, let him hear.
So he is trying to say the mystery is meant to be revealed, So I think that all of these metaphors about, the rocky soil, no roots and the thorns, that's this, our authors call it, these are all conditions of denial, I mean, if you're living among the weeds, and the weeds are trying, I think very literally sometimes the weeds are trying to choke you so that you can't get the word out and nobody's listening, kind of a thing.
I wonder if it's almost, I had a sense of a football coach here, like Jesus is trying to coach him up and say, well, which one of these groups are you guys going to get? Are you going to be the winners who are going to on, bear
Yeah.
good fruit, or
Yeah.
are you going to let the world choke you out and your effort won't be good for anything?
Yeah.
You know, it's like,
Along with that, raises the question, why is Mark saying Jesus is explaining this to the disciples? The disciples are the ones who would understand it.
I know.
It may be kind of like, well, folks, I know those people out there understand, but let me tell you exactly what they understand.
Yeah. Because
well,
you don't understand it either.
but it said he's out on the boat, so presumably had a large crowd that he was talking to. I think this was,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, maybe a large group.
Yeah, but at this point, he's in with Jesus.
Oh,
Yeah,
did he leave
Yeah,
that?
because
Oh,
they
okay.
asked him, why are you doing
Okay,
this?
I
And
missed
so
it.
he's explaining to them, this is the reason why. And I agree with the disciples
Yeah.
why he was doing it.
Oh, that's
So,
right. They're out in the boat now.
Yeah.
They're all
Well, following your coach analogy, like, did you see how that other team screwed this up?
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you what they should have done. And, in a way, the coach is preaching to his own people
yeah.
because the other team's not there.
Yeah.
Because he says that, if you have ears to hear. I mean, he says it all the time. Everybody has ears, everybody has eyes.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get you to see it. I'm
Yeah.
trying to get you to hear it.
He's
It's like-
trying to get people to get away from the status quo. If there's
Exactly.
something better,
Yeah,
you just keep
Yeah.
kind of going along this way. We need to shake you off that, get you to step up to this other belief.
right.
He's saying you've got to be open.
Yeah.
You've got to listen.
You gotta listen.
Do
Well,
something.
You
I
got to
mean,
act. You
It
got to
really
listen
was.
and you
It
got to
really
act.
was revolutionary too. I mean, you can imagine how it stirred people up. Because he's saying that the God is sovereign and not the government.
Right.
Because remember during that time period, the Roman emperors were gods. And so it really was about a totally different system. This empire. I find it kind of interesting that Star Wars really takes that to the next level for us. Because I'm thinking,
Star Wars is a very spiritual story.
it really is. It is. The more I read about the history of what George Lucas did, he
Yeah.
really did write it
Yeah.
in that same sense of
Mhm.
this metaphor
Oh, yeah.
for that kingdom. And there's a lot of stories that are like that.
That
So-
was our Sunday night. Our Sunday night family thing was nobody planned anything in St. Louis
Okay.
because we didn't have service. So nobody planned anything. We were all in front of Star Wars.
So
Don't
you,
call
you watched them on TV?
together.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's awesome. That's so cool.
And we talked about it.
Yeah.
And we told
This
our
is the way.
relatives, don't call Sunday night. Just don't call.
Get your popcorn out.
Yeah.
And so, our authors talk about, and we see a lot of times, whenever Jesus is doing his miracles, he's healing, and most of the time he's healing the deaf and the blind, which I thought was interesting to take it to that next level of being metaphor, also. So it's this message to say he is here to heal us both physically and emotionally and mentally. That's what our authors are trying to say. That healing the deaf and blind means more than the literal. It means listen to me.
Well, I think it always did for Jesus, and he sometimes seemed to be a little frustrated that people wanted the physical miracles without appreciating the spiritual and emotional miracles that
Yeah.
happen
Yeah.
to forgive somebody.
Yeah.
He said, the guy that got lowered through the roof, he said, how easy to tell somebody to get up and walk, but it's much harder to get into the kingdom of God. So, he was a little frustrated. So, not that he didn't want to heal people, but
Well, and even today, we talk about, the way we do our administration. Sometimes there is a physical healing, and there's belief in that, and we have the physical healing. But a lot of times it's about the emotional. I personally, when I receive administration, it's usually in a time of turmoil, and I need that spirit of God to kind of clear away the weeds, so to speak, in my own mind, and so that kind of opens me up to listen to the Spirit more. So I really take this metaphor very seriously for myself. It really is him saying to me, You got ears. You got eyes, but you're not listening, you know. That's what he's trying to say. The parables are meant to reveal, not conceal. That is the imagery of the lamp. That's exactly what we have kind of said with our little children's song. Okay, anybody want to read Mark 4, 24 to 34? Okay, Cora.
He said to them, listen carefully. God will evaluate you with the same standard you evaluate others. Indeed, see even more. Those who have will receive more, but as for those who don't have, even what they don't have will be taken away from them. Then Jesus said, this is what God's kingdom is like. It's as though someone scatters seed on the ground, then sleeps and wakes night and day. The seed sprouts and grows, but the farmer doesn't know how. The earth produces crops all by itself. First the stalk, then the head, then the full head of grain. Whenever the crop is ready, the farmer goes out to cut the grain as it's harvested. He continued, what's a good image for God's kingdom? What parable can I use to explain it? Consider a mustard seed, and scattered on the ground, it's the smallest of all seed on the earth. But when it's planted, it grows and becomes the largest of all vegetable plants. It produces such large branches that the birds in the sky are able to nest in its shade. With many such parables, he continued to give them the word as much as they were able to hear. He spoke to them only in parables, then explained everything to his disciples when he was alone with them.
So it's kind of what we just said. It's almost like he says it two different ways, you know. And he's kind of saying it two different ways to us too. If you understand it through the parable, that's great. But here's me explaining the parable, which is also good. You know, I think he's trying to reach out to. I always think of it as there's all of us that we listen and we learn differently. So I kind of like the concept of he's telling us different things. So this is that economic determinism that he's pushing up against, and he's saying to the farmer that patience is a good thing. You know, he picks that patient hope that the farmer has, that the seeds are going to, the parables are telling them that they are going to sow fruit. You know, I mean, he takes a mustard seed, and how many times have we used that in our sermons?
Oh my gosh, I can't tell you how many children's were
exactly.
moments I've
Exactly.
done. I have my little
pass
handful
out
of seeds.
all the little kids are keeping the little, and then
tiny
it really is a wonderful image when you look at the tiny mustard seed, and then you imagine the huge plants that it can become, you know. And he's taking, once again, the Old Testament prophets' words. You know, our authors go into more detail, but I just kind of mention them. Ezekiel and Daniel. There is tree imagery in those Old Testament verses too, and it's kind of about that promise to Israel that they will be able to produce branches and bear fruit, you know, and it's all about that good soil. So it's kind of wonderful to have a tree and a plant imagery. You know, it's so easy to preach from that. I mean, we've seen, all of us have done it. You know, like we talk and we teach through this imagery of the land and plants and garden, you know, and you know, working in the garden, waiting till after flowers bloom. And, you know, it's such a beautiful metaphor for what, you know. I like our authors are saying, and I haven't gotten there yet, but what is our stewardship over our own land? You know, and so Jesus is clear what we should do. You know, it's going to be hard sometimes. You're going to throw it on you know, sometimes the birds are going to eat it, and sometimes the thorns are going to choke it. Keep planting. It will, you know, if you have faith, if you have this patience that he's talking about, then it's going to grow 100-fold, you know. So it's a pretty big promise.
This is kind of interesting because thinking of our foremothers and fathers, when they immigrated to the
Mm-hmm.
United States and then started moving west, they completely went past the plains because I'm sure they had the whole concept that the soil is, if it's strong enough for a tree, it's strong enough to plant. You know? So they completely went right by us because we didn't have this area because there weren't trees. So kind of, to me, it kind of links back to these imageries of, you know, that tree can be big and
Yeah.
grow.
That is interesting.
Because they missed out that this was like actually the best soil.
Now remember though, we had the Oklahoma Sooners. You know, I mean they.
No, I mean I get that, but I mean that the idea for them was you had to clear all those trees because that soil was strong enough to raise these huge, mighty trees.
Okay.
And they went right by all the grass plains because it can only grow grass. It's not fertilized soil. And it turned out completely the opposite.
Yeah.
That was their mindset because they didn't have, you know, they were still the history of the planting, you know, that they had for thousands of years.
Well, and what our authors are pointing out too is that we need to, you know, we need to look clearly, we need to look honestly about the history of what our ancestors did to us. You know, we devastated this land. I mean, we cut down trees that didn't cut down because of the, you know, the industry of lumber kind of thing. You know. I've read enough books now that just it's amazing what the early immigrants did, and they ran over all the indigenous people. You know, the indigenous people were actually treating the land the way God is saying in all these metaphors. You know, and they didn't even understand what ownership meant. And so all of a sudden, you know, we've got these people coming in, and we're just, to me, when what the authors say, it's kind of a flip, you know, where Jesus is talking about, you know, the cycle of poverty versus the empire, and we kind of did that to the indigenous people. You know, I mean, you think about even today that they're, you know, they're on their reservation, and they have that cycle of poverty. We know that from some of our own friends, you know, and so, you know, I'm not here to blame. I'm just here for us to look at our history realistically. I think that's what our authors are trying to do. How do we have stewardship over our own land now? And let's look at our history realistically.
To piggyback on that, when you think about it, right now it's very dumb. You have an express that we
Oh,
during the last 59.
I actually had to drive
trees
down.
upon trees upon trees.
I had to drive down that in the last year, and I used to work right up on 109th. And there was a beautiful oak tree that sat on a hill right at the interchange. And I came around the corner, and it was chopped up. I was kind of like, oh, I'm going to get to see my big old oak tree. It was stuck down there. And it's all for that. And I think we do have to be aware of that. I mean, we have to go back and look at history. Many of the people who came from Europe were coming from England, which at one point in time had colonies around the world so that the sun never set on the British Empire, right? And they were the ones who colonized in such horrible ways. Other European countries did that too. I mean, we can't just stop at looking at what happened here. I mean, the people who came probably didn't have any other concept except colonize, because that's where they came from, and they were the third, fourth, fifth born of a family, and so they had nothing, so they were looking for something. But this happened in Africa, this happened in India, this happened everywhere around the world.
It's kind of human nature that you know, I mean, how many times do we say, I just want a piece of my own, you know, I just want something to call my own. And so the immigrants were coming from oppression where, you know, the king owned everything, and the king was in control of everything, and that's why our forefathers decided that it's not going to be the king and the church that rules this country. You know, I mean, they were very clear that there's going to be a president, not a king. You know, I mean, there was a big debate about whether George Washington should be called a king. You know, and he even said no.
He
I'm
won't
not
do
going
it.
to. And they recognized how the government, and the oppressive empire, what they did to their people. But then, unfortunately, our authors point out, we kind of did the same thing to the indigenous people, you know.
Well,
And
not, yeah, again, I think, we have to look at it we can look at it from our perspective, but we have to look at it for what their ignorance was and understanding.
sure,
I mean, we did the same thing to Africans by enslaving them.
yeah,
They weren't completely inhuman, right?
yeah.
Neither were the
This
Native
is the
Americans.
history
The Native
of
Americans
humanity.
were even
Yeah.
lower than the slaves.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
we
part of my
understand that now.
Part of my comment earlier is we're still doing this.
Yeah.
We are.
We're tearing down trees, going down to somebody can get from 130.
Yeah.
And we want to charge them.
And we're not paying attention to the stewardship of the land, you know.
Well, it applies to neighbors. Somebody elderly people, nobody's planting.
What is it? What is the famous saying? The person who has hope is the person who plants a tree of the shade they will never
That
see.
they know that they're never going to see.
Yeah.
I love that.
That's actually a Native American
Yeah.
comment.
Did anybody look up this book by Will Campbell called Providence? Even though, did you look it up?
No,
I'm going
I
to.
highlighted it.
I didn't. Yeah, I was gonna say I want to read
yeah,
that.
I had to
Just
land
what a
it.
wonderful concept to take a square of land and just follow it through history in America, in Mississippi of all places.
I couldn't figure out, was that like along the Mississippi or was that the state of Mississippi?
I
Should
think,
have been a little clearer on that.
yeah, I
So-
took it as the state of Mississippi
I went back.
because it went through the plantation, Choctaw Nation,
Yeah, that's when I
plantations,
realized.
and all the way through civil rights movement, and then people were trying to have a multiracial cooperative community, but then you think about Civil War times, civil rights movement, and there's still to this day we have the battle with the white supremacists, and it's like who is to own the land, who is to control our country, kind of a thing. I mean, it's just a battle. It's fascinating to me that there are certain things that Jesus was talking about that he really is still talking about today.
Well, you think back on the 60s when so-called hippies were having fun with that. And they kind of were trying to get back to that kind of
Yeah,
work together.
the commune,
And they shared everything, and they didn't own anything. And that's where John Lennon probably came up with his song, Imagine, that time period. So you think about, there's kind of this moment in time where in our recent past.
Well, I honestly
there's
think
some
that's what
focus of
Joseph
that.
Smith. I do think that was his concept, of the sharing and the storehouse, and come and you think about the time frame that our early church was in. We had some very, very poor people. This was like right around, right after the Civil War, and so people were devastated. So I do think, at least conceptually, our church was founded on this same concept, this Jubilee concept, so to speak. So the story of the land is a spiritual and political challenge, and our authors ask us, does anybody know our own histories? I don't. I do not know the history of my great-great-grandparents, and what kind of land they ended up. I know my grandparents never owned land. They basically always rented. And, I think of my parents established owning a home, and even today we talk about that, and I struggle with it myself. It's like, do I own property, or is it okay just to rent property? If you rent, then you're beholden to the landlord, and it's a struggle, of where do we belong?
Not everybody came from an agrarian background either. As far as we've been able to go with my family, everybody, they were miners. I think they came to this country to the Upper Peninsula and mined copper, and then they went out to Colorado and mined silver, and, you know, so
Yeah.
they would need their own set of parables to, you know, to relate to a lot of
Maybe
this.
you
I
could
think.
make up those. That would be interesting.
Paul, I was just sitting here thinking the same thing. That's exactly our history of the country, just exactly. And the mindset of those immigrants and the coal miners, they did exactly what they knew they had to survive, and that their family survived. Now, they didn't just look out for themselves. They always planned down the road. Some of them had it, you know. I got stories that you won't
They
believe.
planned. They planned to take care of the generation.
They did.
Yeah.
They did exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what we're dealing with.
Well, I had a coal miner great grandfather who he figured out that if he did the dangerous job, it paid more money. So he was the dynamiter, but he was also the minister for the RLDS church, and he would go in and set the dynamite fuses, blow up the area that needed to be dug
Say a
out.
prayer.
Probably
Yeah.
many of them, but he would go out, it'd blow up, and then the coal miners would go in and spend their time digging it out, and then he could go on missionary trips in the interim, come back and do his job again.
It's a-
And
Don't put your dynamite out in the open where it's not going to do any good, but put it in a rock where it's going to blow up and the
Yeah,
coal's going to
yeah.
blow up.
it had a good metaphor,
Get out of there fast.
but it was actually my great
We can
grandmother
have
who ran the
metaphors for
family.
all of our own histories,
Yeah.
can't we?
So, but yeah, they were doing that.
Well, it's interesting. On the inside, miners are, but often it's a company store.
Yeah.
But having to buy
There's that cycle again.
Yep.
There's that cycle.
and
Yeah.
I think reading that, I think about it was I'm not sure what happened after. Although we refurbished it, and it was we left. We hate to say Germany, but it was somehow houses supposedly just so all fencing around the room was torn down. All the baby blue carpet was torn out. So, it was, I don't know what the moral of that story is, but
No, yeah, you can't go back. You can't go back. I mean, I don't know. How many
That's
times have
definitely
you gone back? My childhood home is at 49th and Woodson, right there. And every once in a while I drive by it and I'm like, what did they do to our house? I mean, they painted and they have different fences. It's like, there is this kind of weird feeling of ownership that we have even after we left. Yeah.
So my siblings and I, we text once in a while with each other, and then it kind of blew up this week because we lived in Fort Lauderdale. That flooded this week, and we had two homes that we rented when we were down there, pointing down there, and it did all of us. Our homes were flooded. We know those childhood homes. And that kind of shocks you a little, even though we were renting, we were there 5 years. But it's a shock when you lose that home, even if it's past home.
I think we have to recognize, and I think our authors are trying to help us recognize, there's a lot of people, don't have that ground. Even for me, mine's kind of a little bit shaky, I would say. I had a father who his parents, every year they moved. I don't know the whole story, but it's partly because of the father. And so that's the legacy that Dad has to leave. And so he's very, very serious about taking care of his has a little tiny strip of grass in the condo that they live in now, and Dad is out there every day taking care of it. And it's amazing to me how connected he is with his own land. You know, I didn't get that, you know, and I worry sometimes because I don't think I'm as connected to it, and partly because of it's overwhelming to take care of it, you know. But I do think our authors are asking us, take a look at the land differently, you know, your own land where you're at, and if you don't have, you know, if you don't have ownership of your own land, then they want us to kind of spread it out, and you know, we've all got the experiences with the ocean and with the mountain, you know, a certain place in nature that we can actually ground ourselves, you know, and that's, I think, part of what he's saying too, is just try to look at the land like God did. You know, it's important that we establish that God meant, and I'm going to ask, that God meant for us to live freely, peacefully, with justice, to take care of the non-human. You know, where is the Creator loves and thanked for creation's bounteous gifts? Are we doing that in our own lives, both the physical, looking at the land, and then as a metaphor for the spirit, is what I think. So I ended with my own question, where is Zion? This is a concept that our church has had from the beginning of time. Where is Zion? Where is the gathering place? That's this groundedness that I think that's what these scriptures are.
There's another thing that just keeps going through my mind here, Jane, that it makes it harder for us in this land thing. There's education thrown in. Back in Jesus' time, that probably was not as much as
But remember,
it is
he's
now.
talking to the illiterate. I think it was an issue for them too.
And it was very difficult to help these people rise up when they had no education.
Yeah.
Like my mother's ancestors did exactly what Paul's did. And he, the great-great-grandfather, came down from Michigan. He worked in the copper mines when he came over from England. And he had made so much money as a supervisor, manager, whatever, that he could buy farms for 8 kids down in Colorado County. And so one day I said to John, how did he do that? He's an immigrant. Why did he get that kind of job? And John said, because he could do right. And that's part of our problem.
It is. And it kind of goes to different levels now, you know. I mean, you know, I think we're kind of, I don't know what America is doing now. I think we're starting to value again the people who have the, you know, the AA, you know, working with their hands. But it used to be, you know, I was the first in my family to go to college, and everybody's working to get their children into college and into graduate school, and that's the main, that's the,
We get on a highway of things, you know.
Yeah.
Like
What does success mean?
Yeah, and for a long time, you know, there were the two. There were, I don't know,
The haves
Kansas.
and the have-nots.
Well, Kansas City, Missouri, Kansas had a school for people to learn mechanical and plumbing and this and that and all that. But then everybody was like streamlining everybody for colleges, and I think that kind of got, for a while there, we got lost in all that, and everybody needed a degree. Now I think you're right. They're realizing, hey, wait, we need people who can fix your backed up sink and toilet, and you know. So all of a sudden, they're realizing that they were losing those skills, and I think that is coming back. Thank goodness.
Yeah, it is about the balance, and it is about, you know, what does education mean? I think you're right. I mean, reading and writing, even today, you know, that makes a difference in what job you can, you know. Many people have said, well, I don't read very well. And it changes that perception of who we are, you know. And so,
and how far you can go and
yeah,
fit into society.
yeah. Our church, just to kind of finish up here, our church has evolved in what Zion means. You know, the gathering place. We've talked about this before. It's like, my grandparents moved here from Arizona because that's what you did. You know, you gathered to the center place. And I do think that our church has had to evolve to say Zion is also where you're living. You know, and these authors are saying Zion, or Kingdom of God, is about where we plant our seeds, where we feel grounded, where we recognize that Jesus is trying to teach, what he's trying to teach us. That's sowing the hope. This is like a whole sermon.
The mustard seed parable, you can toss a few mustard seeds out in the garden. It starts in one place, but then I've never seen a mustard bush or whatever.
Me neither.
We
We
always look at the
they're very
seeds.
creative.
And they're
We've
big.
always looked
They're
at the
huge.
seeds and coconut. Nobody ever brought a mustard plant to church.
That's when you can't get it through the door.
But
Jane,
that's what the kingdom was.
Yeah. Arlene wants to
Jane,
speak. Go ahead.
yeah. I did a sermon one time about the mustard seed, and the bush that we get the seed from is what they make the actual mustard that we eat out of.
Okay.
But the mustard seed that they talk about is not that. It's a little tiny seed, and I had whoever was on, well, it was Cynth that was on the PowerPoint that day, and he pulled up a picture of a mustard tree, and it's huge. It can get huge, but we think of the mustard seed as what we eat, and that's not where it's at, because that's a little bush type thing.
So to get the mustard, you have to grow the
Looks like
seed.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Oh. But the other is what she's talking about is that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I found first.
You can have, there's a lot of
Well,
the mustard seed
going
and the
back-
tree. And
The one thing you said about the Native Americans seemed like they were closer to, I think that's where our culture, our Western culture needs to kind of start thinking
Yeah.
of the land as Native
Yeah.
Americans did, where we're part of it, we're borrowing
Yeah.
it, we thank you for giving us what you have
Yeah.
given us, and
sharing
it back as well.
Like Joan's regifting ceremony. Remember that?
Yeah.
I was amazed at that.
That was fun.
Table upon table of things. And it was hard for us to figure out what to do with that. But I still, to this day, have a
I have
little
mine.
box that she gifted me.
I have a cane.
I have a little
See?
table.
She knew that, she understood that concept very well. So there we go. All right. Thank you, everybody. Next week is World Conference, so no class,
Right.
no church.
Church over it.
Go to Independence if you want to go to church.
Well, and can
it's
you
a-
do it online too?
Yeah.
Yes, or go online.
I think
That's,
it's what, it starts
I
at
don't know how to
10,
do that, but
10
yeah.
o'clock?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Who is
Thank you.
teaching 2 weeks from now? Jonathan is teaching. There you go.
And it'll be
Chapter
Chapter
6.
six.
Okay.
So there was a little part at the end of this chapter, I just realized. I put my book away.
Okay.
There was something very end.
At the end of this chapter.
Because I got to the end of the chapter and then I turned the page and I'm like, that doesn't say it's a chapter, so it's called Our Discipleship Journey.
Oh, are we ready for the? We're ready for the next section.
And then we go into the next section, but then I didn't read this second part.
Oh, I didn't read that.
I didn't see that until this morning.
Maybe Jonathan can answer.
Okay, Jonathan, help us read Our Discipleship Journey. Because it was probably supposed to be a recap of this section, but I'm not sure because I didn't read it.
Well, you covered part of it because you talked about it.
Well, there you go. Okay, so
Well, that
continue.
will-
Those two were those two.
Read
I didn't
that.
even see it.
Read that.
Clearly.
And we'll do that plus chapter.
Okay, because we're moving into section 2,
Yes.
Yep.
Journey of Solidarity.
Opening